Sudsy, so great to chat with you. First and foremost, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
You know what? Considering the options, I'm actually feeling great. I've been a few, about a month and a half, almost 2 months since my last chemo session. So I'm starting to recover. Still wearing, pretty small clothing at this point. I'm down 60 pounds, but slowly putting the weight back on. But getting the stamina back, getting the strength back a little bit. So feeling much better. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to hear that. And if you want a little extra weight, I can pass you some. We'll talk about how you got to that point, but I actually want to start really kind of from the very beginning. You come to Toronto at the age of 6 from Trinidad, and I'm sure like any new Canadian, you learn to love hockey and you play hockey and you have a successful, youth hockey career into U Sports. And then what? How does Sudsy make it from Toronto to the NHL?
It was, there were a lot of twists and turns and strokes of luck along the way. But I had gotten an opportunity to play in Sweden. So I played in Sweden for 6 years. Came back home after I stopped playing and went back to school and started to work as the goalie coach for York University at the time with Graham Wise. I had played. Graham was assistant coach with Dave Chambers back in '85 when I was with York, and so I ended up getting a chance to be the goalie coach with York. And in the meantime, I started to coach some junior teams as well. And over the summers, started to work with more and more pro goaltenders, starting with Stephen Valiquette, and then evolved into Kevin Weeks, Rick DiPietro, Ray Emery, and then on and on and on. So I was coaching all these NHL goalies, but didn't have an NHL job, and eventually got an interview thanks to Steve Valiquette and Rick DiPietro, and ended up with the Islanders. And spent 8 years with the Islanders before moving on to Anaheim.
So in the meantime, so that's a big gap in time from 1985 to 2003.
Yeah,
Is my math right?
Correct. Yeah, it was 6 years in Sweden, and then teaching. I was a school teacher for almost 12 years, working with kids with behavioral issues. And working at so the perfect match, kids with behavioral issues and goalies. And so I ended up spending a good deal of a great many years working with special ed children and kids with behavioral issues, as I mentioned, working at a behavioral center where we work with kids from grades 1 through 8 with behavioral issues. We also took in kids from youth detention and gangs, tried to get them back into school. So it was a tough job, but definitely rewarding.
Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, you're teaching, you're doing individual goalie lessons, you are running camps, I'm sure.
Yes.
And you're coaching, just grinding.
Just grinding. Coaching tier 2. I coached tier 2 for, it was 8 or 9 years, maybe even more. Was coaching tier 2, had worked with all of these NHL goalies and could not for the life of me get an interview in the Ontario Hockey League. And tried to get an OHL job and was unsuccessful getting an interview with an OHL team. And thought, well, you know what, in the truest form of being completely naive, I thought, well, I'll just have to jump over the OHL and head straight to the NHL. And as luck would have it, thanks to Stephen Valiquette and Kevin Weeks and Rick DiPietro, ended up getting that job with the Islanders.
So talk to me about what your life is like getting to that point. I'm sure a huge sacrifice for your family, lots of time and nights at the rink, and just scratching and clawing, putting together presentations, trying to get in front of people so that you can at least just state your case.
Absolutely. My poor wife, when we met when I was a school teacher, so getting that jump to the NHL was a massive thing that she had no understanding of what it entailed, and there were a lot of nights, as you mentioned, grinding away in tier 2, trying to make contacts, trying to go to coaches clinics, working with Hockey trying to do some stuff with Hockey Canada, which I eventually did with the Islanders when I was with the Islanders. But it was a lot of nights just going to the rake and paying your dues. And in retrospect, it was a great thing. I have a lot of young goalie coaches ask me for advice, and one of the things that I say to them, to all of them, is make your mistakes where they aren't as visible. And so I had the opportunity to learn and grow and make my mistakes. And I certainly still make enough of them now, but at the time, as I was going through that learning process, just working through the process of learning the skills of being a goaltending coach.
Did you ever think it might not happen for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I was very naive, and there was a lot of frustration, believing that I had a skill set that I thought I could contribute to some teams, but feeling like I wasn't able to make that leap up was very frustrating, especially when I started to work with the NHL goalies and was getting really positive feedback from those guys, where I felt I would be able to contribute and help some junior goalies. So it did become very frustrating for a while. But again, I was very naive and young at the time, and so kept putting my head down and pushing forward. And as luck would have it, it ended up working out.
Sometimes the only way up is through.
Absolutely.
So was there ever a moment when you were working with your NHL clients, pupils, whatever you want to call them, that it clicked for you? You said, hey, I can do this. This guy that plays in the NHL is telling me that what I'm doing for him, what I'm showing him, what I'm teaching him, this works.
You're certainly, when you're working with goaltenders of that skill set and that pedigree, as a young goalie coach, you're a little nervous. You want to make sure that you're handling things and handling them correctly. And I would have to say, the first time was with Stephen Valiquette. We spent a lot of time together one summer, and I could see the growth in his development, and he acknowledged that, and then ended up, as luck would have it, ended up getting a call up to the Islanders and spending a fair amount of time with the big club that year, and came back the next summer really excited about what he felt had really helped him. And so that there was certainly that moment, and then there was another moment with Kevin Weeks, where I was showing Kevin some things, and he was struggling through them, and we looked at different alternatives, and ended up finding some alternatives that really worked well for him. And I remember standing there thinking, wow, that was something that felt good. It felt great with Kevin, and I know that he was just like Stephen Valiquette was very excited about some of these new things that we worked through. So yeah, definitely there were a few moments going. I was telling the story the other day. You have those moments, and you have your welcome to the NHL moments. And I was coaching 1 year with the Islanders, and we had 3 goalies at the time. We had Rick DiPietro, we had Dwayne Rolison, and we had Marty Durant, all talented goaltenders. And so one morning we went out for a goalie skate, and it was DiPietro, Rolison, and Durant, and my shooters were Doug Waite, Bill Guerin, and Miro Shatan. And I remember standing on the half wall, looking at these guys going, this is a lot of fun standing on the ice right now. And they're listening to me. How incredible is that? So it was a great welcome to the NHL moment for sure.
It's definitely a lot different than Tier 2 in the Toronto area, just hoping for a shot to get to the OHL. When so you've been in the NHL for 21 years now, and I'm sure probably just hearing that number, you're like, wow, that's pretty crazy. But in terms of, I guess, maybe reminding some folks who are listening in 2024, they might say, oh, goalie coach, that's interesting. But you were doing a lot of this in the early to mid 90s before personal skills coaches were a thing.
Yes, for sure.
How did you make the transition from sort of just being on the periphery to being, hey, this is an absolute necessity to be successful?
That's a good question. You looked at, I know going through my playing career, I never had access to a goaltending coach. And even, coming from a outfit that didn't have a lot of resources, didn't have access to goalie schools, not that there were many of them around. And so, once I retired and I came home and I thought, well, there are some things from the experiences that I've had I'd like to share. And so I went about really looking at the game, because my game, I grew up idolizing Bernie Perrant, which was a playing style that was slowly disappearing, even back then. And so I had to really set about learning the new goalie game, the new stylistic elements that I didn't utilize. So I really had to become a student of the game, and I really admired some of the goalie coaches, the original guys that were in the league, the Francois Lairs, the Rolly Melansons, the Benoit Lairs. I really admired a lot of the things that they were doing, and so went about studying those guys and what they taught, and then took a little of what they taught and combined it with the old school elements that I felt were still successful, and could still be applied. So there was a real opportunity to reevaluate the position and take it down to its bare bones again, and relearn it. And it was a great decision to start at that point where I almost convinced myself that I'm starting over. I know pretend you know nothing about the position and relearn it. And it was back then there weren't a lot of videos, there weren't a lot of books, there weren't a lot of resources. So it was really watching, listening, and study is what went into it, as well as I said, combining the modern elements of the game with the elements of the game that I had grown up with.
So I'm going to put you on the spot. How much of being a goalie coach is physical and technical, and how much of it is mental? Like, give me some numbers. What's the spread? What's the split?
I'm gonna have to differentiate a little bit there in terms of the phase of the career phase of your goaltender. So let's take a John Gibson who is 10 years into his pro career. There's much less technical work that you have to do. There's still some. There's always sharpening of a skill set. So we would go through a whole series of almost a checklist of technical things to just make sure that all those skills are operating at max performance. So the technical elements are they're less technical teaching with John, where there would be some more video work, there would be some more mental prep work, there'd be some more game preparation work. Now, if you take a young guy like a Lucas Dostal, who is coming into the league and learning the position, when Lucas first broke in, again, it was a full checklist of individuals of skills, but now you have to introduce where some of the lapses are in his game, where some of the things where he's not as strong. In Lucas's case, when he first came in, it was really learning how to utilize his hands to the best of their ability. So we spent a lot of time on puck tracking and the utilization of his hands. So in Lucas's case, there was a lot of technical work that went into it at first, and along with the game prep and the practice prep and all of those things. So it really depends on the phase of the goaltender. When I had guys like Dwayne Rollison towards the end of his career, again, not a lot of technical work, but Freddie Anderson, who I was working with with the farm team in Norfolk, Virginia, with the Ducks, and then eventually the NHL. Again, there was a lot of technical work as well as off ice. Freddie was learning how to the proper elements of a good diet and all of those things. And so being able to spend time helping him with those things, as well as the technical elements and the game elements, are hugely important. So it all really depends on the phase that the goaltender's in, and really where their needs lay.
So the reason I asked you about the separation of physical and mental is probably an easy transition to what you've been dealing with for the last month, or not the last month, the last year plus since you were diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. There's a physical toll, of course. There's also a mental toll, which you've been open about as well. And I think a lot of people around the league saw your video with the team, but just take me to, you hear those words, you're diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. How do you process that?
It's fun. I was talking to my wife about this the other day. When I first heard the words, I didn't believe it. I thought, no, it's benign. It's probably something that's just blocking it. What had happened was this, because the cancer had formed where it did, it blocked my pancreatic, my gallbladder duct. And so when I discovered that the bilirubin was flowing into my blood, and other areas, and went through going to the hospital, I honestly didn't believe it. And I didn't believe it for the longest of time. I thought, no, they've got this wrong. It's.
You thought you had an ulcer.
I thought I had an ulcer. I thought, no, this isn't cancer. This has got to be something else. And it took a meeting with the surgeon and my family doctor and an oncologist before hard-headed me finally thought, okay, this is real. There's no denying it anymore. Let's get to it. So it was. It went from lack of or disbelief to, okay, I believe this. Now what do we do? And I think that really helped me because I didn't spend time worrying about anything. I went from not believing it to, okay, how do we fix this? And didn't spend any time in between in that woe is me land. And that's not because of any inner strength. It was just out of, again, I think a naive element and that hockey background of, okay, well, what do we do next? And so it was a quick trip to let's get to work and get to it. I was very, very fortunate. I had some exceedingly good doctors. Dr. J. Raman here in Toronto, Dr. Coe here in Toronto, Dr. Lawrence here in Toronto, all spectacular doctors. And so that, our healthcare system takes a beating, and rightly so in some areas. But I have to tell you, I got very lucky with the three doctors that I had.
So when you say how do we attack this? I mean, this has been an aggressive path to get to where you are. Before and after surgery, 11 rounds of chemo at last count. A significant surgery in which you had some, I guess, what's the best way to say it? Some of your organs maybe kind of rearranged so that they could get to where they needed to get to. I mean, we're talking serious stuff. And there's a physical part of that. And I don't know that you necessarily, I love your humility, but I don't know that you give yourself enough credit in terms of, hey, that's not naivety. Like that's, there's a strength to addressing that head on, whether you want to see it or not. Just working your way through from last year to now. I mean, you've been through hell and back.
Yeah, it was the first part of it when we started the chemotherapy. I knew I was in trouble when my very first session. The nurse was hooking me up to the machine, and she looked at the medication or the chemo bags, and she looked at me and she said, "Wow, they're hitting you with everything they've got, huh?" And I thought, "Oh boy, that doesn't sound great." And sure enough. After the first session, I got a call a few days later. The chemo had wiped out my entire immune system. I had no white blood cells in my system, and they called me from the doctors and said, "You need to get to the hospital now. You have no immune system." And so, I went after one bout of chemo into the hospital for almost a week till they could inject me with some different medications to get my my bone marrow to produce more white blood cells, and my bones just ached. And so suddenly there was that. Then after another chemo bout, I developed blood clots in my lungs, and another trip to the hospital. And then a few more chemo sessions went by, and it has started to affect my heart rate. I walked upstairs, one flight of stairs, to go up, and my heart rate hit 167 and wouldn't come down. So my wife had to call the ambulance, and off I went again. And so there were, 5 bouts of chemo and 3 trips to the hospital. So there was no question there was a grinding mental element to it that was frustrating. But in the end, it was game on. And there was no sitting by and hoping this thing went away. It was in my face the entire way. And then some adjustments were made. As you mentioned, we had after 5 rounds of chemo, we had what's called a Whipple surgery, where they removed my gallbladder, part of my small intestine, part of my pancreas, and part of my stomach. And so there was a 2-month recovery from that, followed by 6 more rounds of chemo. Luckily, fortunately, they had made some modifications to the medication, and so there were no more trips to the hospital. But it took it was a beating nonetheless, I have to say. Doctors do a very good job of not telling you just how bad chemo is, but let me tell you, it wasn't a pleasant experience, to say the least. But I'm grateful that I was able to get to the stage that I'm at now.
So you revealed in your message to the team when you had a chance to address them in Toronto in February that at some point, I'm sure there were some dark moments that you had called John Gibson, who of course you lovingly refer to as Gibby, and you said, "Hey, will you be a pallbearer at my funeral?"
Yeah, it was. I actually made a few of those calls. I called John Gibson and asked him. He was obviously, to say the least, he was caught off guard. But I'll give John credit. He stood up for it. I also called Kevin Weeks, and Kevin stood up for it. And I called Ryan Miller, and Ryan Miller stood up for it. And then my 2 brothers and my best friend, one of my best friends. And so making those arrangements, one of the things, I have 2 daughters, two incredible daughters, Alexandra and Catherine, and I sat them down and we went through the whole procedure of the funeral. And what I wanted, one of the things that I said to them was, the worst thing that can be said is, I wish I had asked him. I wish I knew what my dad wanted. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity. And I wanted my daughters to see that there wasn't any fear in it. It was a matter of, here's what life has thrown at us. Let's not be afraid of it. Let's not be afraid of death. Let's not live our life afraid of of death. Let's plan this out, right down to the playlist for the funeral home. And when I was being cremated, the people that know me well know that I consider Jimi Hendrix a deity, not a musician. So when they hit the button for the cremation, Voodoo Child's Flat Return was to be played. I was going to go, if I'm going to go meet God, I'm going to listen to God, on my way out. So we had the whole thing set up, and I'll give my daughters credit. At first it stung them, but they handled it well.
Sudsy, I've never met you. I didn't chat with you at any point before today, and I got to tell you, I spent my morning before our conversation today making calls around the league to find out more about you. What makes you tick? Who are you? What's your story? And just the normal homework that I would do for any podcast or show that I do. I got to tell you first off how much love, how loved you are around the NHL. There's not one person in hockey that would say a bad word about you. Everyone has been, lifted by your presence, and this is obviously well before your illness. And what a special perspective you've been able to provide for people since, you've been able to share your story. That, the Shakespeare quote that you shared in your chat with the team, like I was in tears listening to it, because there is, as dark as things can be at times, there is another way.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Fred. Thank you. I've managed to fool them for 20 years. Coming from my situation where I was a school teacher, I think that was a huge benefit for me in terms of dealing with different people. And for years and years, I've said it. I don't coach goalies; I coach people. And so getting to know those goaltenders and those, as people, I think, has been hugely advantageous. Not just on a professional level as a goalie coach, but also on a personal level. One of the things that I pride myself on is that, we all have an ego. I can deny it as much as I want, but we all have an ego. But I try to put the player first all the time. And I believe that, a good goaltending coach or a good coach in general stands behind that player when things are going very well, and stands in front of them when things are going poorly. And if your goalies, your players, the fellow coaches that you work with, if they really believe that that's your true intent, I think then I think you're going to have some success. I'm a big fan of everyone that I've met is like a library book. And so over my 20 years, I've managed to amass a collection of wonderful personalities that I've had an opportunity to read and shelve. And so I'm humbled that you say that about me, but B, I take pride in those interactions, because whether it's Cam Fowler or Trevor Zegras or Miro Shatan or whomever, it's great to get to know these people as people, because so many of them are just wonderful personalities.
How has the hockey world helped you along the way here over the last year? You mentioned Jimi Hendrix and your love for, I guess, is it accurate to say all music, but heavy metal, I guess, is your thing.
You have been speaking to some people.
I'm telling you, I don't mess around. I do the work. But shortly after your diagnosis, Henry Samueli, the Ducks owner, you get a call from someone in Metallica?
It was, it's funny. Mr. Samueli, if you meet him, you would never know based on his appearance. This is why you never judge a book by its cover. You'd never know that he A, is such a music fan, but B, goes like myself, likes the harder music. And so in the midst of my chemo, I was feeling obviously not well. And one day my phone goes off, and I look at it, and I'm thinking, who's sending me a video message? I'm really not feeling well, and I sort of reluctantly click on this thing, and sure enough, it's Lars Ulrich, the drummer from Metallica, who is a friend of our owner, Mr. Samueli Henry, and his daughter Jillian, who's a wonderful person as well. They contacted him and say, hey, listen, our goalie coach isn't well. Can you send him a message? And sure enough, I have this personalized message from the drummer from Metallica. I almost fell off the chair. I was just absolutely blown away for them to do that. In terms of how the hockey world has helped, it starts with as I was diagnosed with this disease, my contract was expiring, and I was worried that how am I going to make it through this, not just physically but financially. And sure enough, my phone rings one day, unknown number, and I pick it up, and it's Mr. Samueli calling me personally to say, hey, I understand what's going on. Jillian just told me about the illness and all of that. I just want you to know, do not worry about anything. We're going to re-sign you, and your job is to get healthy. And once you're healthy, we'll figure it out. And so not only did Mr. and Mrs. Samueli do that for me, he personally did that for me. And calling, and Jillian Samueli, their daughter, who is the owner of the Gulls, our farm team, constantly called and checked in, and was in tears when she got the news. So it's in terms of the Ducks, Aaron Tietz, our team president, Pat Verbeek, our general manager, constantly checking in on me. As I mentioned, a lot of my former goalies, Kevin Weeks, Valaket, numerous goalies checking in, Gibson constantly, Freddie Anderson. I had a knock on my door one day. I opened the door, and there's Freddie Anderson standing there. Hey, I was in town. Thought I'd come by and see you. I know you're sick. Came and sat and spent about 4 hours sitting with me, just catching up. So what the hockey did for me was they took care of me, and they definitely bolstered my spirits. People constantly checking in, other coaches from other teams, other goalie coaches from other teams, constantly texting and seeing how I'm doing. I was absolutely blown away by the show of support and affection from the number of people in hockey. It's truly a great environment.
Everyone says you've had a great energy about you forever, but what does what you've experienced over the last year tell you about the power of positivity?
Oh, you know what? It definitely has taught me that, Frank. It's also taught me the power of gratitude. You sit on a chair and you stare at the same wall for a year, and you have a lot of time to think. I was so grateful for all the things that hockey has presented itself. I said to a few people when they called, when I was quite young and we were living in Trinidad, we didn't have a lot of means, and there were times where I didn't have shoes. And then here I was, fast forward however many years later, and Bauer, gives me things from their stores as a thank you for wearing their skates. And so you go from that background to the National Hockey League, and from no shoes to getting paid to wear skates. It really is humbling and wonderful. On the other side of it, I also got to see some negatives. negatives in myself. I didn't feel that I had been gracious enough and generous enough in some areas in terms of donating money or donating time to different organizations and people. And that's something that I vowed that I'm going to change. And so it gave me a chance to evaluate myself on the other side of it. At Christmas time, just before Christmas, Scotiabank decided that they were going to cash any NHL checks. So right before Christmas, Scotiabank wouldn't cash any of my checks. So I had no money for Christmas. And this was the bank that was supposedly the proud sponsor of hockey in Canada. And yet wouldn't, so I had 2 or 3 days between chemo sessions where I was feeling well enough. And I had to spend running around trying to find a bank that would give me money. So I had money for Christmas. And when I saw the bank manager, she basically said to me, "This is about profits. It has nothing to do with customer service." And so I got to see corporate greed at its highest end. And I got to see where my faults lie. Or a few of them anyway. And yet I also got to see this beautiful side of so many people that reached out and were so generous in so many areas. So it was a great learning experience for myself. And I really had an opportunity to evaluate what was going on around me and what was going on internally, so that I could try to be a better person if I came out through the other side.
And not only have you come out through the other side, but in your, I guess, true nature, you're paying it forward. Mike Stothers, of course, the Ducks assistant coach, his cancer diagnosis, he says your story helped him get checked out sooner when he thought something might be off. And you and Mike Stothers were both awarded a $25,000 grant as part of the NHL and NHLPA giving plan with the 25th anniversary of the Hockey Fights Cancer Initiative. Tell me about what you're doing with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, which is also known as PanCan.
Yes, when we were given this money, which I was so thrilled with. I mean, what a wonderful thing. Mike has decided to donate his portion to Ronald McDonald House in Anaheim, and so I've joined forces with the PanCan people, and as luck would have it, they're having a big fundraising walk from the Honda Center this Saturday, the 27th of April, and so the Ducks have asked that I fly down to California. And I'm going to be, I've been asked to speak a few words at the beginning of the event and cut the ribbon. And truly one of my greatest moments in life, I'm sure, I get to present the giant cardboard check to the people of PanCan for our donation before the walk starts. So timing of it worked out perfectly. And then for it to go towards pancreatic research, according to the PanCan website, within 5 years of diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, the survival rate is 15%, which is horrifically bad. So for anything that we can do to elevate those numbers, which results in human life, is fantastic.
So you were staring down similar odds. You were told 20 to 40% survival rate for your diagnosis. What's next? What's Sudsy going to tackle next? I know you've been on a plane to Sweden. You've been scouting. You've been back in the rink. Are you back to full bore, or will you be soon?
You know what? I'm getting there. I spoke to our general manager Pat Verbeek to see sort of what the coming plan is, and he hasn't quite defined it yet. But there is sort of indication that we're going to move towards a director of goaltending type situation potentially. It's not official yet, but we're hoping that might be something that Pat moves towards. And so there would be, a chance to oversee the goalies with the Ducks, oversee our farm team. We're in a good situation. When I joined the Ducks, we had Jonas Hillier and Victor Fast up top, but we had Frederick Anderson and John Gibson in the minors. And it was my job to get them out of the minors into the National Hockey League. And I say it all the time. I wasn't squeezing any blood from any stones. Those are two talented goalies. Well, right now we're entering a phase with the Ducks where we have Lucas Dostal. Obviously, we have John Gibson, but we also have Kalle Klang, Thomas Sedhanik, Gage Alexander, and then we have a young Russian goaltender, Vladislav Buzayets, and a young Italian goaltender playing in Sweden by the name of Damien Clara, who just was the starting goalie for Brynäs when they moved back up to the Elite Series, the Swedish Elite Series. And so we're entering this phase where we have these good, talented young goalies that we need to spend some time with. So I'm hoping to be able to spend the kind of time that I had with Freddie and Gibby that I can with our young goalies in Anaheim.
Love to hear that. Sudsy, it was such a pleasure of mine and honor of mine to spend time with you and tell your story. And your perspective is so powerful. And I think the hockey world's all better off for having heard it. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it, Frank. Thank you so much. All the best.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.